International House opened its doors as the first coeducational, interracial living center west of New York on August 18, 1930. Funded by John D. Rockefeller, Jr., International House Berkeley was the second of 4 international houses dedicated to international friendship and peace. Founder Harry Edmonds aimed to strike bigotry and exclusiveness right hard in the nose, at a time when segregated sororities and fraternities excluded international students and people of color. George Kelham was the architect of the 240,000 square foot building, which has become an East Bay icon. Alan Blaisdell was the first executive director of iHouse, serving from 1930 to 1961. Throughout his tenure, he fought racial discrimination and bravely spoke out against the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. From the 1930s to the 1950s, iHouse was one of few places in the Bay Area where people of diverse ethnic backgrounds gathered socially in an integrated setting. Program director Eugenie Carniero established the first international festival in 1932 and continued to coordinate cultural programs until 1955. Ms. Carniero recalls,
"At each international festival, we see a spark shining with faith in the belief that people of different backgrounds and cultures can work together toward a common good."
This 1941 newspaper photo includes Director Blaisdell with residents from Syria, India, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Japan. Soon after, Pearl Harbor was bombed and Japanese students were deported. Director Blaisdell helped prevent or delay resettlement of Japanese American students in internment camps. Recalling the onset of World War II, alumnus Harold Gilliam writes,
"There was a special irony in being in the house at that time. The world seemed to be in flames with bombs dropping in Asia and Europe. But at iHouse, we wanted to keep alive the hope for a world of friendship among all people."
During the war years, International House was rented to the U.S. Navy and temporarily renamed Callahan Hall. 800 to 900 Navy students lived in the house, double the pre-war occupancy. During the Callahan Hall years, iHouse residents lived in 5 fraternity houses on Piedmont Avenue. This was the first time residents had shared rooms, and many enjoyed the close friendships they developed with their roommates. In 1946, iHouse students helped test a Berkeley ordinance prohibiting restaurants and bars from refusing service to people of color. Christiane Cook recalls the role of iHouse residents in ending segregation.
"We had some establishments fined and some closed. After a few weeks, no Berkeley bar or restaurant would have dared to refuse service to a non-white customer."
In the years following World War II, students like Holocaust survivor Lottie Saltz, bearing a concentration camp number tattooed on her arm, lived alongside students who were veterans, refugees, resistance fighters, and other Holocaust survivors. For Lottie, iHouse became her home. Students from post-war era fondly remembered their years at iHouse as the golden age, when students were deeply committed to building a more peaceful world, and the motto, "that brotherhood may prevail," was taken seriously. Among the Golden Age students was Tuskegee Airman Wendell Lipscomb, who voiced the shared sentiment about World War II. It must never happen again. In the 1950s, the coffee shop, now the iHouse Cafe, was a popular place to meet people from around the world. One alumna recalls that the conversations in the coffee shop and the dining room strengthened her view that the commonalities among our cultures outweigh our differences. In 1961, Sheridan Warwick was appointed executive director following Alan Blaisdell's retirement. Throughout the turbulent 60s and 70s, Mr. Warwick preserved iHouse as a home for peace, understanding, and free speech. In 1969, students removed the doors separating the men's and women's sections of the house, and Mr. Warwick chose to ignore the transgression. Soon after, the men's and women's lounges were integrated, forming today's library. During the 60s and 70s, iHouse held week-long retreats in the Sierras at Camp Lodestar, led by program staff Donna Dickinson and Barbara Lynch. The retreats featured intense discussions and built lasting friendships. In 1974, the iHouse tradition of free speech came under attack following controversial programs on the Middle East. The board reaffirmed the free speech policy and emphasized the I-House traditions of mutual respect and tolerance. In 1980, a 50th anniversary capital campaign funded renovations in the Auditorium, Great Hall, and administrative offices. In 1988, Joe Lurie was appointed the third executive director of the House. He inaugurated gala fundraising events, spearheaded a PBS documentary, and wrote the I-House history brochure. Mr. Lurie was known for sharing maxims illustrating the mission of the House. A favorite was, "The stranger sees only what he knows." In 1989, students watched the Berlin Wall come down. Bonnie Wasserman reflects on her experience.
I remember students from around the world watching as the Berlin Wall came tumbling down. I looked around me and realized how many of us at I-House had taken down the walls within ourselves. The world was not only changing on the screen, it was changing through us at I-House. Living here taught me more about politics than my graduate classes in political science.
Between 1990 and 96, the I-House board more than tripled scholarship funding to $220,000 per year to ensure both cultural and socio-economic diversity. Among the many notable alumni of I-House are 7 Nobel Prize winners, including Owen Chamberlain, California Governor Jerry Brown, former United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Sadako Ogata, business leaders including Google CEO Eric Schmidt and former Vodafone CEO Arun Sarin, and Julianne Cartwright-Traylor, the former chair of Amnesty International in the US. The annual tradition of cultural festivals returned in the 1990s with the Edith Colliver Festival of Cultures, a full day of performances, arts and crafts, cultural booths, and food from around the world. Today, other traditions continue, such as Sunday suppers for residents and alumni held 4 times each year in a tradition that dates back to 1930. A new ramp at the entrance of I-House was constructed in 1997 to improve access for people with disabilities. Previously, I-House had housed residents who used wheelchairs, but the new ramp greatly improved access for residents and the public. Victor Pineda, a resident during that era, went on to become an international disability rights activist. Rotary World Peace Scholars released doves at a celebration of peace in remembrance of September the 11th, 2001. In the wake of September the 11th, I-House resident Zara Makui recalled,
At I-House, my experience with my American roommate and all aspects of life in the house made me a changed soul. If everyone knew what we learned at I-House, their fear of the other would be shattered, and their hate would turn to understanding.
In an unprecedented partnership between the campus and I-House, the first Gateway Scholarship recipients began their PhD studies at Cal and lived at I-House in 2003. For the first time, this full scholarship package of tuition, room, board and stipend allowed Cal to compete with private universities by offering comparable scholarship packages. A $10 million 75th anniversary campaign conducted between 2004 and 2007 under the leadership of the board and Joe Lurie secured critical funds to preserve I-House as a beacon of hope. Anniversary events held around the world have secured corporate, individual and foundation support for vital renovations to our building. Martin Brennan was appointed the 4th Executive Director in 2007. The Cal alum and former ambassador brought more than 30 years of international affairs experience to the job. With Ambassador Brennan's leadership, International House initiated formal training in cross-cultural skills, including a 4-unit UC Berkeley course entitled Navigating Cultures. Weathering the economic downturn of 2008, I-House provided scholarship assistance to 20% of residents to ensure diversity. Thanks to the generosity of I-House alumni and friends around the world, I-House scholarship recipients gain the cross-cultural skills to become the global leaders of tomorrow. The final Sunday supper of every year includes the traditional candlelight ceremony, where the symbolic flame of enlightenment honoring our global humanity is passed among residents, alumni, and friends. 2010 marks the 80th anniversary of International House, and its mission remains as vital today as ever. To foster intercultural respect, understanding, lifelong friendships, and leadership skills for the promotion of a more tolerant and peaceful world. As we continue to weave our stories together, we invite you to join us in celebrating 80 years of International House.